Nsukka was a village known for its rich traditions, fertile lands, and deep-rooted customs. But above all, it was known for Obi, the young man whose beauty was said to have been sculpted by the gods themselves. Tall, broad-shouldered, and with a face that could make even the coldest heart melt. Obi was the dream of every maiden. Women of all ages whispered about him, and the elders often joked that he was proof that the gods still walked among them. From the moment he reached manhood, Obi became the center of attention. At the village market, women pretended to need his help just to feel his strong hands. At the stream, they giggled when he passed, and at the village square, they stole glances at his chiseled body, hoping he would notice them. But Obi was not just admired, he was worshipped. And like a man who knew his power, he wielded it without restraint. Obi did not seek love, he sought conquest. His charm was a weapon, and he wielded it with skill, leaving behind a trail of broken hearts. For him, love was a game, and he was the champion. Obi's affairs were as fleeting as the Harmattan wind. One day, he whispered sweet words to Nsukka, the baker's daughter, and the next, he was seen caressing Ifeoma, the village healer's apprentice. The young women fell for him like raindrops in a storm, only to realize too late that his affection was temporary. Many cried in secret, ashamed of how easily they had fallen. Others cursed his name, vowing to never love again. But despite the whispers of warning from those he had hurt, more women lined up, hoping to be the one to change him. They believed his love could be tamed, but Obi was like the river, flowing freely, never staying in one place for too long. His mother, Mama Obi, watched in silence. She had raised her son with discipline, yet somehow, he had become the village's most notorious heartbreaker. Obi, she said one evening as he returned from a late-night visit to yet another woman's hut. A man's beauty is a gift, but when abused, it becomes a curse. Obi only laughed. Mama, I am not cursed. I am blessed. The gods have given me charm, and I use it well. She shook her head and said no more, for she knew that life had a way of teaching lessons better than any mother's words. Then came Ada. Unlike the others, she was not drawn to Obi's beauty alone. She was a woman of strength, wisdom, and undeniable grace. The daughter of a powerful herbalist, she had been taught to see beyond the surface, yet even she was not immune to Obi's charm. When Obi set his eyes on Ada, he knew she was different. She did not giggle like the other girls, she did not chase after him or linger when he walked past. This made her a challenge, and Obi loved challenges. With calculated patience, he pursued her. He spoke words that seemed to come from the deepest parts of his soul, swearing that she was the only one who truly mattered. He met her parents, promised her forever, and made her believe she had tamed the untamable. For the first time, Obi felt something different. Maybe Ada truly was the one. Maybe his days of empty love were over, but old habits die hard. It was only a matter of time before he strayed. When Ada discovered his betrayal, she did not weep like the others. She did not beg for his love. Instead, she looked him in the eye and whispered words that sent a shiver down his spine. Obi, she said with a voice as calm as a still river, you have played with the hearts of many, but now your own pride will be your undoing. I curse you. May your manhood grow beyond control, long, heavy, and painful. May it become a burden instead of a blessing, and only when you have learned true humility shall you be freed. Obi laughed. He did not believe in curses, but as he turned to leave, he felt a strange sensation in his loins, one that would soon turn his world upside down. That night, Obi tossed and turned in his sleep. His body burned with an unfamiliar heat, and an unbearable weight settled in his loins. He awoke with a start, sweat dripping from his brow. Something was wrong. He stumbled outside into the moonlit night, gasping for air, his body trembling. He looked down, and what he saw made his breath catch in his throat. His manhood had grown, longer, heavier, unnaturally so. At first, he smirked, believing it to be a divine gift, but when he tried to move, an agonizing pain shot through his body. He clutched himself, groaning as he staggered to the nearest tree for support. Panic set in. He tried everything, washing himself in the cold stream, praying to the gods, even visiting the village's old priestess. But the priestess only shook her head. "This is no ordinary sickness, Obi. This is the work of a curse." His confidence shattered, Obi tried to live as normally as he could, but the villagers began to notice. The once proud and graceful young man now walked with a strange gait. His steps were slow, his movements stiff, and the once admiring eyes of the women turned into curious stares and hushed whispers. The same women who once adored him now laughed behind his back. The men mocked him, calling him the cursed one. For the first time in his life, Obi was no longer admired. He was pitied, ridiculed, and alone. He knew then that he had only one choice, to seek Ada's forgiveness, but would she grant it? Would the gods be merciful? Or was he doomed to bear this punishment forever? Obi knew he could not endure this torment much longer. The pain, both physical and emotional, was unbearable. Once revered by the villagers, he now saw only mockery and disgust in their eyes. His once effortless stride had become an agonizing ordeal. His confidence reduced to nothing more than a ghost of his past self. Determined, he made his way to Ada's hut. The journey was slow and painful, each step a reminder of his downfall. By the time he reached her home, his body was drenched in sweat. He fell to his knees before her, his pride shattered. "Ada, I beg you, have mercy on me," he pleaded, his voice hoarse with pain. Ada watched him, her expression unreadable. "Mercy? Did you show mercy to the women you deceived? Did you think of their pain when you discarded them like dry leaves?" Her voice was calm, yet her words struck like thunder. Tears welled in Obi's eyes. "I was blind, foolish, but I have learned. Please, undo this curse. I will change." Ada sighed deeply, as if carrying the weight of many souls. "The curse cannot be lifted by mere words, Obi. Redemption is earned, not begged for. If you are truly repentant, you must seek forgiveness from all the women you have wronged. Only then may the gods consider your suffering." Obi's heart sank. This was not going to be as simple as he had hoped. But he had no other choice. Obi knew that facing the women he had hurt would be even more painful than the curse itself. But Ada's words echoed in his mind. Redemption must be earned. And so, he set out on a journey of atonement. His first stop was Nsukka, the baker's daughter. He found her kneading dough outside her family's hut, her once bright eyes now hardened with bitterness. When she saw him approach, she crossed her arms, her lips curling in disdain. "What do you want, Obi? Another lie? Another empty promise?" she spat, her voice dripping with resentment. Obi lowered his gaze. "No, Nsukka, I am here to ask for your forgiveness. I wronged you, and I regret it. I understand now the pain I caused." Nsukka studied him, searching for deceit in his words. "Regret does not erase the past, Obi. But if you are truly remorseful, then go and make amends to all the others you hurt. Maybe then, I will believe you." One by one, Obi visited them all. Women he had loved and left without a second thought. Some wept, others raged, a few even spat at his feet. But with each confrontation, he felt the weight of his sins. He listened to their pain, accepted their anger, and begged for their forgiveness. Yet, not all were willing to forgive. Some turned away without a word, their wounds still too deep. And with every rejection, the curse remained. A cruel reminder that his penance was not yet complete. Obi's journey through the village became more difficult with each encounter. The women he had once enchanted now saw him as a figure of ridicule or resentment. His own reflection, once a source of pride, now brought him nothing but shame. The weight of his curse grew heavier, not just in his body, but in his soul. Each rejection was a knife to his heart, but he pressed on. He found Ifeoma, the healer's apprentice, tending to a wounded child by the riverbank. She looked up, her face hardening when she saw him. "Ifeoma, I have wronged you," Obi said, his voice weary. "I seek your forgiveness." She continued working in silence before finally speaking. "You did not wrong only me, Obi. You wounded all who believed in you. And now you come because you suffer?" Her eyes bore into him. "You must suffer more." Obi swallowed hard. "I will do whatever it takes. I am ready to atone." She studied him for a long moment before shaking her head. "You cannot undo the past, but perhaps in time The gods will see your sincerity. If you truly wish to change, then prove it, not just in words, but in deeds. Obi bowed his head, accepting her words. There were many more apologies to make, and each one seemed harder than the last. As Obi continued his search for forgiveness, the villagers began to talk. Some pitied him, others mocked him. The young men, once envious of his charm, now laughed at his downfall. "The great Obi," they jeered, "reduced to a beggar of forgiveness." The elders gathered one evening to discuss his fate. "The boy is paying for his sins," one of them muttered. "But does he deserve redemption?" "The gods decide that," another elder responded. "If his repentance is true, he will find his path. If not, he will suffer until the end of his days." Obi overheard these words and felt the weight of them in his chest. He had once thought himself above consequence, untouchable in his beauty and charm. Now, he saw himself for what he truly was. A man who had used others, who had taken love for granted. That night, he sat under the old baobab tree, staring up at the moon. "If the gods are listening," he whispered, "if there is still hope for me, show me the way." The wind rustled through the leaves as if answering him, but no divine sign came, only the silence of the night and the growing ache of his punishment. Desperation gnawed at Obi's soul like a relentless beast. He had exhausted every path, pleaded for forgiveness from those he had wronged, yet the curse remained. His body ached under the weight of his punishment, and his spirit felt crushed under the burden of guilt. He knew there was only one place left to turn: the village priestess, Mama Ezini. As the first rays of dawn painted the sky in hues of gold and crimson, Obi made his way to the sacred shrine nestled deep in the forest. The air was thick with the scent of burning herbs, and the distant beat of a drum echoed through the trees. When he arrived, he found Mama Ezini seated before a small fire, her aged eyes filled with knowing. "You come seeking answers, child," she said without looking up. "The gods have already spoken. Have you truly learned humility, or do you seek only to escape your suffering?" Obi dropped to his knees. "I have wronged many, Great Mother. I see that now. I have begged for forgiveness, yet my curse remains. What more must I do?" She studied him for a long time before standing and gathering a handful of white powder from a clay bowl. She tossed it into the fire, and thick blue smoke rose, twisting into shapes unknown. "The gods do not lift curses lightly. You must complete your journey. There is one more person whose forgiveness you must seek, the one whose heart you shattered beyond repair. Until she releases you, your suffering will not end." Obi's breath hitched. He knew exactly who she meant. Ada. Obi had faced scorn, endured mockery, and humbled himself before those he had once toyed with. Yet, the idea of facing Ada sent an icy fear through his veins. She had been different. She had believed in him. She had loved him. And he had crushed her heart without a second thought. For 2 days, he wrestled with himself, but the words of Mama Ezini echoed in his mind. Finally, he steeled himself and set off for Ada's hut. The village square was unusually silent as he walked, as if even the air was holding its breath. By the time he reached her home, his legs felt like lead. He knocked gently, his heart hammering against his ribs. The door opened, and there she stood, Ada, radiant as ever, but with an unmistakable hardness in her eyes. She looked at him unflinching, and for the first time in his life, Obi felt truly small. "Why are you here, Obi?" she asked, her voice steady but cold. He swallowed hard. "Ada, I have wronged you, more than anyone else. I took your love and trampled it beneath my feet, and now I am paying for my sins. The gods have punished me, but they will not free me until you do. I come not as the man I once was, but as one who has learned his lesson. Please, forgive me." Ada stared at him for a long moment before stepping outside. "Forgiveness?" she repeated. "You think words are enough to mend what you broke? Do you know how many nights I wept? How many times I cursed your name?" Obi bowed his head. "I do not deserve your mercy, but I ask for it nonetheless, not to escape my suffering, but to truly atone. Tears welled in Ada's eyes, but she blinked them away. The gods will decide if you are worthy of redemption, Obi. But if they demand my word, then so be it. I forgive you. As soon as the words left her lips, a strong wind howled through the village. Obi gasped as a warmth spread through his body, the unbearable weight that had plagued him for months suddenly lifting. The curse had been broken, but redemption was not the end. It was only the beginning. As the wind settled and the warmth faded, Obi fell to his knees, overwhelmed by the sensation of relief. The weight that had plagued him for months had vanished, leaving behind a hollow feeling in its place. He had sought redemption, and now he had it. But at what cost? The villagers who had once mocked him now stood in awe. Some whispered, others gasped. Even the elders, who had long shaken their heads at his reckless ways, nodded in quiet understanding. Obi had changed, truly changed. Ada, however, simply watched him. "You are free now," she said, her voice steady but distant. "But freedom is not the same as absolution. Live wisely, Obi. Do not waste this chance the gods have given you." Obi swallowed hard. He had dreamed of this moment, longed for it. But now that it had come, he realized his journey was far from over. He needed to prove, not just to the gods but to himself and his people, that he was worthy of a second chance. Obi's first instinct was to leave Nsukka behind, to start fresh in a place where no one knew him, where his past mistakes did not linger like shadows. But running away would be the old Obi's way. He had to stay, to mend what he had broken. He began by working alongside the villagers, something he had never done before. He helped the farmers till the land, carried water from the stream, and assisted the elders in their daily tasks. At first, the villagers were skeptical. They had seen Obi change before, but only for a moment before returning to his old ways. But this time, it was different. He labored without complaint, took no shortcuts, and spoke humbly to those he had once considered beneath him. Slowly, the whispers of doubt faded, replaced by nods of quiet approval. The women who once adored him now respected him from a distance, and the men who had envied him now saw him as a brother, rather than a rival. Still, the wounds he had left behind were not so easily healed. As Obi continued to mend his ways, he realized that redemption was not a path that could be rushed. Some villagers had begun to accept his change, but others remained wary. One afternoon, while helping repair the roof of the village elder's hut, he overheard a group of women whispering. "Can a leopard change its spots?" one asked. "He is only doing this because he was forced to," another muttered. Obi clenched his jaw but remained silent. He understood their skepticism. His past had been one of carelessness, and words alone could not erase the pain he had caused. Only through consistent actions could he earn their trust. So he continued to labor, day after day, refusing to let their doubts shake his resolve. Then came his first real test. The village's annual yam festival was approaching, and Obi volunteered to assist with preparations. He was assigned to help with the communal feast, working under the guidance of Mama Nkechi, a stern woman who had never forgiven him for how he had treated her niece. She scrutinized his every move, barking orders and ensuring he received no special treatment. "If you are truly changed, prove it," she said, handing him a heavy mortar and pestle to pound yam until his arms ached. Obi did not complain. He worked tirelessly, sweat dripping from his brow, until the food was prepared to her satisfaction. As the festival drew near, some of the villagers began to acknowledge his efforts, but others still watched from a distance, waiting to see if his transformation was genuine or temporary. The Yam Festival was the perfect opportunity for Obi to prove his sincerity. It was a day of great celebration, where the entire village gathered to honor the gods, feast, and share stories. But for Obi, it was a chance to show that he was no longer the selfish, arrogant man he had once been. As the villagers danced and laughed, Obi remained at the serving table, distributing food with humility. He ensured the elders were served first, refilled the plates of the children, and attended to the weary travelers who had come from distant villages. Then, something unexpected happened. An elderly woman, frail and weak, stumbled while carrying a heavy bowl of soup. Without hesitation, Obi rushed forward, catching the bowl before it could spill and steadying the woman. "Are you all right, Mama?" he asked gently. The crowd fell silent. The same young man who had once been too proud to lift a finger for anyone was now showing true kindness. Mama Nkechi watched closely, nodding in approval for the first time. The festival ended with a great feast, and as the villagers sang praises to the gods, a few began to acknowledge Obi's change, but he knew that trust was like a plant. It needed time to grow. Redemption was not about a single act, but a lifetime of proving his worth. And so, he remained steadfast in his journey, ready to face whatever trials lay ahead. The days following the Yam festival were filled with cautious acceptance. Some villagers warmed up to Obi's change, while others still held their doubts. But just as he began to feel a sense of belonging again, a test unlike any other presented itself. One afternoon, as he helped repair a broken fence near the village square, a familiar voice rang out. "Well, well, if it isn't the great Obi, now a humble servant," the voice sneered. Obi turned and met the smirking face of Cheek, an old rival from his days of reckless charm. Cheek had always envied Obi's popularity and took pleasure in taunting him. "So, is this what you've been reduced to? Pounding yams and fetching water for forgiveness?" Cheek laughed, loud enough for others to hear. A few villagers paused to watch. Obi took a deep breath. The old him would have responded with arrogance or wit, but not today. He looked Cheek in the eyes and said, "A man who cannot own his past cannot shape his future. I have wronged many and I am making amends. That is more important to me than pride." The crowd murmured, impressed by Obi's restraint. Cheek, caught off guard by the response, scoffed. "Let's see how long this act lasts." And with that, he walked away. Though the moment passed, Obi knew his journey was far from over. He had overcome his anger, but his next test would come in ways he never expected. A few weeks later, the village chief summoned Obi. He arrived at the elders' council, where the village leaders sat in a semicircle, their faces solemn. "Obi," the chief began, "we have seen your efforts, but trust is not easily restored. The gods test all men, and you shall not be an exception." Obi bowed his head. "I am willing to do whatever is required." The chief exchanged glances with the other elders before speaking. "There is a widow in our village, Mama Udo. Her son, her only support, died in an accident last moon. She struggles to care for her land alone. You will serve her for a season, till her land, mend her roof, and see to her needs as if she were your own mother. This will be your trial." A murmur ran through the room. Many considered tending to another's household a menial task, unworthy of a once proud man like Obi. But Obi did not waver. "I accept," he said, his voice steady. And so, the next morning, he moved into Mama Udo's small compound. The widow, frail but strong in spirit, met him with guarded eyes. "I did not ask for this," she said, arms crossed. "No, but I have been asked to serve," Obi replied, bowing his head. "I will do my best." The first days were grueling. Obi carried firewood, repaired the broken door to her hut, and fetched water before dawn. Mama Udo remained distant, unwilling to trust easily. But with every act of service, Obi felt something shifting, not just in her, but in himself. Would this be the true test that finally proved his sincerity? Only time would tell. Obi's days in Mama Udo's household were long and demanding. From sunrise to sunset, he worked tirelessly, tending to the widow's farm, repairing her leaking roof, and ensuring she had enough firewood for the cold nights. Every task he undertook tested not only his physical strength, but also his patience and humility. At first, Mama Udo remained distant, rarely speaking beyond giving instructions. But over time, she began to watch Obi closely, taking note of how he never complained, even when blisters formed on his hands, or exhaustion threatened to overwhelm him. She saw him rise before dawn, kneeling by the river to wash before beginning his duties. She saw the sincerity in his efforts, the silent redemption he sought with each laborious act. One evening, As Obi finished mending the fence that bordered her small plot of land, Mama Udo approached him. "You work hard," she said, her voice softer than before. "Most men would have left by now." Obi wiped the sweat from his brow and met her gaze. "I am not most men anymore." For the first time she offered him a small smile. It was not full trust, not yet, but it was a start. Word of Obi's service spread across Nsukka. The villagers who once doubted his transformation now saw him in a different light. Men who had scoffed at his fall from grace now nodded in respect. Women who had cursed his name now whispered of his change with cautious admiration. At the village square, the elders watched his progress. "Perhaps the gods are truly at work in him," one elder mused. Chief Okiki, the village leader, observed quietly. "If he has truly changed, time will tell. But so far, he has done what few men would." One morning, as Obi carried a heavy basket of yams to Mama Udo's hut, a young girl ran up to him. "My mother says you are different now," she said, tilting her head curiously. "Are you?" Obi smiled at her innocence. "I hope so, little one." And as the days passed, the village itself began to transform, not because of Obi's past, but because of the man he was becoming. As the days stretched into weeks, Obi's efforts did not go unnoticed. Mama Udo, once stern and skeptical, began to soften. She no longer barked orders at him, but instead offered quiet words of guidance. One evening, as they sat by the fire, she handed him a bowl of steaming soup. "Eat, child. You have worked hard." Obi hesitated for a moment before accepting it. It was the first time she had called him anything other than his name. "Thank you, Mama Udo." She nodded and stirred the fire with a stick. "You remind me of my son, before the gods took him. He had your same stubbornness, the same fire in his heart. Perhaps, in some way, you were sent to fill the void he left." The weight of her words settled on Obi's shoulders. "I will do my best to honor him, Mama Udo, and I will continue to prove that I have changed." She looked at him then, for a long time, and in her eyes there was something new trust. Just when it seemed Obi had finally earned the village's acceptance, an unexpected challenge arose. One afternoon, while gathering firewood near the river, he heard loud voices. Rushing toward the commotion, he found Chiki standing over a trembling young boy, his face red with anger. "You stole from me, didn't you?" Chik growled, grabbing the child's arm. Obi stepped forward. "Let the boy go, Chika." Chike turned, his eyes narrowing. "And who are you to tell me what to do? You think just because you've been playing the obedient servant that you're a different man? We all know who you really are." Obi took a deep breath, his muscles tensed. "I am not the same man I was, Chika, and I will not stand by and watch you harm a child." The crowd that had gathered murmured amongst themselves, waiting for Chika's reaction. The old Obi would have responded with arrogance or violence. But this was his moment to prove himself, once and for all. "If the boy has wronged you, let the elders judge him," Obi said firmly. "Justice is not yours alone to give." For a moment it seemed Chika would strike him. But then, with a scoff, he released the boy's arm. "This isn't over," he muttered before storming away. The villagers watched Obi, their expressions unreadable. Then, one by one, they began to nod in approval. He had faced his past without falling back into it. With the festival season approaching, the village elders called for a gathering in Obi's honor. It was a rare moment of acceptance, a sign that he had proven himself beyond mere words. As the drums echoed through the night, Obi stood before the people of Nsukka, humbled and grateful. "I have spent my life taking without giving, breaking without fixing. But today, I stand before you as a man who has learned the value of service, of redemption. I owe my change to all of you." Ada, standing among the crowd, gave him a small smile. Mama Udo, seated with the elders, nodded approvingly. Even the skeptical Chief Okiki acknowledged him with a firm gaze. The night was filled with laughter, dance, and food, but for Obi, the true celebration was the feeling of acceptance that he had fought so hard to earn. As the sun rose over Nsukka, Obi knew his journey was far from over. Redemption was not a destination, but a lifelong path. The next morning, he knelt before Mama Udo. "I will always be here to help you," he promised. She touched his shoulder gently. "You have done more than enough, Obi. Go now, and build something for yourself. The village no longer sees you as a cursed man, but as one of us." Obi stood, feeling a lightness he had not known in years. He looked around the village, the same village that had once scorned him, now filled with faces of those who had forgiven him. As he walked toward his future, he whispered a silent thanks to the gods. He had been given a second chance, and he would not waste it. The end.